All right, and welcome into the weekly conversation. Week 4, the recap here on Friday Night Drive. I'm Matt Rodewald, and good to be with Steve Soucie once again. Hard to believe we already get to the halfway point, and there's been a lot of data points we've learned to get to this point. I would say so, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you look back at week 4 and what we picked up out of that, it was, as far as a week can be, it was kind of calm for the most part. I didn't feel like there were a lot of monumental upsets at the top of the board, but where I found interesting as we dug more into it, there were some games in the middle of the pack that kind of sorted out in a different way than maybe I was anticipating, and it's led to some, I guess, some chaotic reads and trying to figure out how this might go.
Yeah, I think that's been the tough part. And, we're going to touch a lot of different bases here in these next 40 minutes or so. But the one thing that stood out was when I read what you had today in the Shaw Local. And if you haven't read it, do so. Just the idea of parity at the high school level and just kind of that evening things out. I'm trying to think of dominant teams right now. I think of one, East St. Louis. And then I think of everyone else, really. When normally the Mount Carmels, normally the Loyolas, but they all have a blemish at this point, and it seems like there is more parity. What do you attribute that to? If you can guess, even at this point, just 4 weeks in the season.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if I can put my finger on exactly why that is, but it definitely feels like, especially in a lot of conferences in the middle classifications, when I'm talking about like 3 to 6A, it feels like the gap is closed a little bit between the top teams and the middle tier teams. The top tier teams might still be the same teams, but it's not as easy to sled as it maybe has been in years past.
I think of the matchup between like an Althoff and Unity. I mean, that's a 3A and a 1A, and that thing was a barn burner, back forth, back forth. Is that a good example of what you're kind of talking about in terms of just like people can go play up and down maybe one class size, but we're seeing the two class sizes where they're ranked and they're playing barn burner games against each other?
I think there are two things that like I can point to, just kind of looking at where we're at right now, that speak to something almost entirely different than what we've seen before. The first, and we talked about this a little bit on Friday night, the CCL Blue is a conference that we usually expect dominance from. And we look at it now, the collective record of the conference is 8-8. So that says something about where we're at right now, just in general. And I think the other thing, and I was looking at this a little bit earlier, let's take the Kishwaukee River Conference as an example. Granted, it's an extreme example, but you've got one team at 4-0, and then you've got 6 teams at 2-2. 4 of those 6 teams have been outscored by their opponents this year. So it's kind of all over the place. It's like you can't just pinpoint it and make a clear pecking order in a lot of these conferences. And that's what's, I think, making it real interesting, because that's what I do on a regular basis. I look at these and I'm trying to put together what is a comprehensive pecking order, and I can't do it because there's so many conflicting pieces of information that through 4 weeks, maybe we haven't got complete resolution to it. Maybe we'll get it in a couple of weeks. Maybe we won't. I mean, maybe it'll just be like this all year long.
I wonder if it's going to be like this until we get to, say, a second or a quarterfinal round where the entire day is just dynamite games because of the fact that there's so much even keel. And, you get the element of non-conference teams playing against each other, especially when you go 7 weeks in a row with your conference opponent. Yeah, you depending on how the brackets sort out, fine. But all of a sudden you're going to get that Geneva-Canelan matchup in a quarterfinal, which could be really good, for example, in Class 6A. And I'll give you another point, is when I go through the 6A top 10 rankings statewide here, you have an opponent, you have teams that play at a 7A team, another 7A team. These are ranked teams, by the way, 3A, 4A, and then in their class at 6. That's just Class 6A. So they're willing to play all over the place. Fenwick having to play Montini, so you have the enrollment disparity there, close game. You had Belvedere North and Boylan, kind of a close game for a while, and they're in conference foes, and you have enrollment changes. So, the enrollments may not matter as much as just the fact that the football seems to be pretty even all the way around.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to see it kind of work its way. Work its way towards that. You've got well over 100 teams right now that are sitting at the 500 mark. The pools of teams that are sitting at 3-1 are smaller than they usually are. The 4-0 group is staying pretty much the same, but I think that's really telling. The pool of the 2-2 teams is so much larger than it usually is, and I think that speaks to the general overall argument. Are we experiencing more parity? The list of teams that we have at 1-3 right now includes some heavy hitters. I mean, so it's like we've got, it almost feels like it's like a new era where you can't take a lot for granted anymore. You can't sit here and say, well, these are the teams that I think are going to be 4-0 and 3-1, and know you're pretty much going to be right when we start the season. That is not the case this year. We did have some of those 3-0 teams fall off last week that maybe were not.
Yep, there were a few
that were not ready to kind of make that leap into the elite group, but there were some that continued on. I mean, so it's I think we're having some flip the script situations with several teams. And we've talked about this before. We both really enjoy those stories, but not only is that interesting for those schools, it also has a very interesting effect on what these brackets are going to look like too, because some of these teams that we're talking about that are emerging are going to take the spots that we're accustomed to much different programs being on those lines, and then those programs are either going to maybe not be in the field or on much lower lines because of it. So it's going to make for a really interesting playoff field, I think, that we're going to get. And I thought we saw it a little bit last year. I think we're going to see even more this year, where you're going to get to the second round and you're going to feel like this is a second round game.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
I mean, that I feel like that's what we're gonna end up having this year. Obviously, there's going to be bracket situations that don't provide for that, but I do think there's going to be several scenarios where you just look at it and say, this does not feel like a round 2 game to me.
It's just going to be a different look all the way around because, at this point with Loyola with 2 losses, is going to slip down a little bit here. They're going to be in a different spot than you're normally seeing them. You've got Glenbard West at 0-4. That's a different story altogether. But, a lot of those 1-3s, and we'll get to the 1-3s, are going to be teams that you're not accustomed to seeing on the road in the first round. And you're going to have a lot of coaches, and I know there are a lot of assistant coaches that are going to pay attention to this line, is, see those jerseys? The teams you see on TV the last 10 years, those guys aren't on the field. It's this group. You're seeing a different group out. That matters to kind of illustrate it that way. You mentioned 3-0 teams that kind of slipped back. Marist being one of them, down to 3-1. 7A was riddled with them with St. Charles North, Lincoln Way West, Normal Community that you watched a little bit in person in terms of moving back to 3-1. And St. Francis, one of those teams where you thought, oh, okay, 3-0 after going into Wilmette and getting a win and then finding themselves losing at home to St. Rita. So there are a lot of surprises that you can just look in the surface and go, this is going to be really hard to figure out.
Yeah, and it has been. And the thing that keeps coming at you is that, there are several teams that, maybe got back to the 500 mark on Friday night, and then you look at their schedule that's right in front of them the next 2 or 3 games, and you're like, oh, boy.
Oh, no.
That looks difficult. I mean, so just maintaining that 500 record is going to be difficult. I mean, just based on what's coming ahead of them. So, and that's what happens when you have, like I said, a larger group of these 2-2 teams. You look on your schedule, there's obviously going to be a lot of teams in there that are going to be sitting kind of in the same boat as you all. So getting that separation and maybe putting together a string of wins against teams that are kind of in that same situation, it's going to be critical for a lot of programs. You might look at your schedule and see 2-2, 2-2, 3-1, and think, well, I got to get 2 of the 3. But if you string together those 3, you're in real good shape. But if you don't and you lose them all, you're in terrible shape. So, and that's, I mean, it seems like there's just so few breathers on a lot of teams' schedules this year. It's like every time you look up, it's another guy ready to take a swing at you.
It's a grind. It really is this year. I'm going to switch gears just a tad bit and ask you, because I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit here. Okay. So of the 4-0 teams, which one is the most surprising one to you, or which one comes to mind first as a surprising team that's 4-0 this year so far?
I think I would probably answer that question with, I think it's DePaul Prep.
Yep.
I think that's the team that I'm going to go with, just because of I guess they haven't played the real meat of their schedule yet, but they've also played some solid teams that they've had a lot of trouble with in the past. So getting them to 4-0 and impressive the way that they just kind of took care of business on Friday night and getting to 4-0, that's the actions of a team that's ready to make the next step.
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting to 4-0 and you're squeaking them out every week, congratulations, you've done what you needed to do. But when you're up against a team that maybe in the past has given you a little bit of trouble, and you just kind of take care of business and just kind of roll them off the field, that's the sign of a team that I think is ready to maybe make that next step. And I think DePaul Prep might be that team.
Squeaking it out and getting to 4-0. I'm looking at you, Sycamore. Exactly. I mean, they're a good team. We know that that's a tough schedule, but hey, a win's a win's a win. But my surprising team at 4-0, the Oswego Panthers a bit. And it's not the fact that, they are 4-0. It's the fact that they are looking as scary of an Oswego team as I've seen in 30 years coming out of that place. That defense is roaring. That offense is frightening because they're putting points on the board. What they did to JCA is clearly making some noise in that region about what's going on there. So I think the Oswego Panthers look like an 8A state title contender right this minute, and I cannot wait to see them and Minooka tangle in Week 8.
Well, we know how unsafe this is. We've talked about this before, but if you start doing transitive property studies, Joliet Catholic has beaten Fenwick. They've beaten Marist. Now, granted, both of those games came down to the wire, but Oswego handled Joliet Catholic when they played them.
Yes, they did.
It was a dominant performance. And, in years past, I've kind of looked at Oswego's conference and kind of thrown my hands up and said, you guys figure it out, because I can't. But right now, I think Oswego goes into that conference as the clear favorite to win it. And I'm sure that, Minooka is looking at that saying, hey, what about us? I mean, we're undefeated. We're doing good things too.
And they score a ton of points too.
Yeah, but I still think that Oswego is your clear favorite in that conference. And it's been a few years since I can say that's clearly the situation. I mean, you probably have to go back to past era Oswego before this recent blip and before you can have a team that you would say that's the clear favorite in that conference.
I mean, you're talking the 92, the 2003, and then this team. I think probably in that conversation in terms of how good that program is historically speaking. But ever since the split, it's been just kind of, can we get one of these teams going? This might be the year that one of them finally does, and it's the Panther group, I think, more than anything else. Speaking of scary, the mid-suburban West is just nasty this year. I mean, I could have picked Friend to answer that question. Hello, Friend. The Friend Vikings. But, there's a lot of 4-0 fun in that league right now, and Barrington is the least talked about team of that group.
It's interesting, that you mentioned the 4-0s in that type of situation. And, when it really comes down to it, and we haven't talked about them either, Palatine's 3-1, and they're a really good football team.
Yeah, I mean, they're a play away from being 4-0.
You've got 4-0s and Palatine in that conference right now. That is crazy town. I mean, it's like you just kind of look at it and you're like, well, geez. I mean, you got this week. You've got 4-0 against 4-0, 4-0 against 3-1, and Barrington has Conant, who hasn't won yet. But that's the breakdown of the. I mean, there's no other conference in the state that can say that. We've got undefeated, 4-0, 3-1, and then the other 4-0 is playing in the other game. I mean, it's a 6-team conference, but it's absolutely nuts right now.
I'm in Geneva, so I'm not too far from that area. So yeah, I did a little bit of ahead of time because of the Jewish holiday. The best part about the Jewish holiday is that they move the games to Thursday, so I get to go see games on Thursday and Friday and Saturday if need be. Yeah. And Barrington and Schaumburg in Barrington on that Thursday. It sounds like that might be the place for me to be that Thursday night. I mean, yeah, you got the Palatine crosstown, but, I think to see that Schaumburg defense try and figure out that Barrington offense on a Thursday night, that might be a good appetizer for the weekend.
Well, Thursday night.
That's a couple weeks, just so you know. Yeah.
Thursday night is an option when I can actually go somewhere. So we might have to
right.
flip. So we're each at one, so we can get a good look. So that's
exactly
the same. But that's another thing that I always look forward to is that week that I can sneak out and maybe catch a Thursday night game that is outside of my little umbrella area here. So that's something I'm definitely looking forward to. And definitely that conference is delivering a lot of intriguing matchups every single week the rest of the way.
Schaumburg is 4-0. We have no idea how good they are, do we?
No, I really don't know for sure. And like I said, that's how we're gonna learn a lot more about them now, because we can start stacking them. The mid-suburban, along with the central suburban, are two of the conferences that you just kind of have to say hold your horses before you really kind of figure out what they are, because they don't start playing one another until week 5. So that's the first time you get a chance to kind of stack them up in their own element, because I'll be honest, this conference historically, they've played wildly disparate non-conference schedules. So, and I know why they do it the way that they do it, but
we talked about it a little bit Friday.
It's just one of those things where, yeah, you can get out to a 4-0 start, but that 4-0 start might be a lot different than someone else's 4-0 start based on who you played, what you did in those games. So now is kind of the proving ground. Most other conferences, you start getting that proving ground last week, the week before, and in some cases in a lot of conferences, obviously, they start coming at you right away. But you won't really get a clear pecking order on how good these teams are. Maybe not this week, but I think next week we'll kind of have a concrete picture of what we're looking at.
And with the MSL CSL partnership, the exception to that rule last year was Glenbrook South, who actually piled up just a ton of points, got to 4-5, but they were 3-5, having to win that game to get to 4-5, which is going to make it just even messier for us in week 9 this year, as we're going to have to watch more 3-5 teams to see which ones kind of slip into that backdoor slot if they get into the postseason. So we go from 4-0, and poor Conant, you get Barrington this weekend for homecoming up there. That's the one exception to the rule in that too. We go from 4-0 teams to the 1-3 teams, and there's a bunch of teams that are sort of surprises, I would say. Which one surprised you the most in terms of which one may have to panic the most in terms of what they have to build on the rest of the way?
Well, I think Brother Rice is obviously in a not great situation right now. Sitting there at 1-3, Mount Carmel in week 6, an undefeated St. Lawrence team in week 8. You finished up with St. Ignatius in week 9. I mean, right there's 3 games
really tough
that are in utero, if you would. So that's definitely a uphill climb for them. We talked about this before. Obviously, they're in fairly good shape if they end up being one of those 4-win teams. We need 4-win teams. Brother Rice is going to have a truckload of points. So they're going to be in a good situation there. Obviously, they don't want to put themselves in that situation. But in order to avoid it, at minimum, over the last 5 weeks of the season, they've got to go 4-1 in that schedule that we just talked about. Doesn't seem very likely.
Yeah, and one team that is 1-3 that might have a ton of points, a truckload of points, as you would say, is South Elgin. I did not see them going 1-3 to start, but they better figure things out fast. Yes, it's nice to have Barrington and Batavia, which could easily get you 18 playoff points, just those 2. But we haven't really seen what that team could turn into, and it's clearly taking a step back. The only question is, how far back have they gone?
Yeah, I don't know if it's gone all the way back to where they're going to have troubles with the remaining teams on their schedule. I guess we'll find out. But you want to talk about a program that has a softened schedule over the last 5 weeks of the season. That's a good place to start. I mean, they played up in the non-conference. It did not work out very well for them, but over the I think honestly, if we're talking about it bluntly, there might be one other team left on their schedule that might make the playoffs, and the rest of them are not going to make it. So
yeah, looking at it now, West Chicago got to 3-1, which is a surprise to me, and they might do something, but I think they run the table here the rest of the way. But still, a surprise to see them slip back, and I'm going to be very curious to see if they have a good matchup or a favorable matchup, say at a 6-3 clip on the road for a team like that in the first round, that's no fun or no picnic for anybody who's used to winning a lot and then having to go on the road in the postseason. Should be fun.
Yeah, they're kind of a role reversal type of team in terms of what we're used to from them. Is usually they just ramble through their old schedule. They'd end up as a 4 or a 5 seed, and then you'd be looking to see who that underseed was against them as a potential upset bid because South Elgin hadn't really played anybody during the regular season. Now the shoe might be on the other foot. They might be that 28 seed, to be honest with you, and they might have to play a 5. And who's the 5 going to be? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It could be anyone across the spectrum. It could be someone who's emerged. Right. It could be a superpower. I mean, that's just the way that it's going to break down in 8A this year.
The other surprise, I would say, Lake Zurich. I didn't expect them to come out at 1-3 either. And Friend kind of opened everyone's eyes. But the flip side of that coin was the slow start that Lake Zurich and the guys at Bryce Erkman and company kind of struggled out of the gate there. There's just not enough offense for them right now. They're going to need that in a league that has a lot of offense.
Yeah, and there's new challengers to that throne too. Usually, you would look at maybe a slow start for Lake Zurich and say, okay, they'll ultimately be fine once they get back into conference play. But now you've got Lake Forest playing better than they have in years. Libertyville is now a legitimate threat to picking them off. Mm-hmm. It's just like so. You just don't have Warren to worry about anymore in that league. There's more problems lying there in front of you. Stevenson seems to be at least a viable threat to Lake Zurich there too. So, I mean, there's just more teams that if Lake Zurich isn't able to get on a second half run, the reason for that is going to be that depth of that conference has improved so much over the last 2-3 years. Lake Zurich couldn't afford a slow start here. There's going to be more hurdles for them to have to clear than years past.
At this point, you cheer Fremd as much as you can to get all those points to help you, because if you have to get to 4 and 5, that's going to be a help too. But after this week, they have Lake Forest this week. It's the 4th of 4 straight road games for Lake Zurich, which is a mess. They get a couple of get-well games with Zion Benton and Mundelein. So you would imagine at this point, you're looking at potentially 3 and 4 going into Warren and Stevenson. You need both of them, I think, at that point, and that might not be easy to get.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's just like you just have so many obstacles that are in your path right now in that conference. And in the past, you might have 1 or 2 games where, you felt like we're going to be a test for you. Now you got 5. So it's like that's just the escalation of that. And once again, circling back, I don't think parody's a fair word here. I think that it's just gotten better. That's really what it comes down to. It's just become a better, deeper conference than it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago.
Let's spread around the state a little bit. What are some of the results that jumped out to you? Hang on a second. Peoria just scored again. I just wanted to add that in there. 86 points for Peoria and company. What shocked you? What kind of raised your eyebrows to go, oh, that's interesting, outside of the Chicagoland area?
There were a couple in the Central State 8 that really raised my eyebrows this week. Rochester falling to Chatham Glenwood. I know Glenwood's a good team. I didn't dispute that.
I know they were that good.
But seeing that the way that they kind of hemmed in Rochester and just really kind of took them out of their flow offensively, that's something that almost no one can do against a Derek Leonard coach team. So that was a little bit surprising to me. The one that really jumped off the page to me in that league this week was Quincy Notre Dame beating Sacred Heart Griffin as badly as they did. Like, I know Sacred Heart Griffin is not where we're used to from that program, but like we talked about before, Quincy Notre Dame, if they get into playoffs, is a 2A team. And for them to do that, it cemented in my mind that they are good enough to compete in that conference that is largely made up of 5A and 6A schools and certainly get themselves a playoff berth. That win and the ease that they did it with leads me to believe they might be able to do a little bit more, and get themselves actually a pretty decent seed out of this. So they really raised my eyeball. And another little minor shout out, Bloomington moving to 4-0.
But the Raiders.
Yeah, that's something that I did not see coming, to be completely honest with you, because it was, when you look at what, I mean, they've been, sitting around, qualifying as a 5-win team. They went to Normal West and beat them badly. I mean, they didn't just beat them, they beat them soundly. So those were kind of the three right there that really kind of raised my eyebrow in Central to Southern Illinois. It was like but those were the big ones.
I am looking forward to week 6 because Normal Community goes to Bloomington, and that will be a dynamite event. And then they have Peoria still on the schedule, so whoever has the ball last could possibly win that game. Quincy Notre Dame, by the way, starting their first 4 games all at home. I've never seen the 4 in a row, and we've seen a couple times here just tonight talking about it. It's very odd to see 4 in a row in one way or the other. Usually the extreme is 3, and alternating is one thing, but to have 2 in a row of anything is kind of a surprise. But 3 is an odd one, and 4 is insane.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I realized was happening a little bit last year, where there were teams like looking for games, and a lot of them were like adamant that they had to have a home game. And I'm like, well, it may not work out for you.
It's not going to work for everybody.
You don't understand. We've got 7 road games this year. I'm like, what are you talking about? You've got 7 road games. So it's like, I mean, at some point, the schedule maker glitched because we had a lot of these teams that were lopsided one way or the other, and then now it's flipping back. So now they're lopsided in the other direction.
That's the coach knocking on the AD's door. Can we talk? I got a problem. I need to work on here. And I'm just looking at the Central State 8 West. Can I just go through this with you real quick? Because we mentioned Quincy Notre Dame. Jacksonville has a situation where they're 4-5 games at home. That seems like a lot. Hold on a second. So Quincy Notre Dame started with 4 straight road games. Springfield is in a stretch right now. They just finished 3 straight road games. Now they'll have their next 4 at home. So, and that starts with Quincy Notre Dame. Springfield Lamphere. They had 4 in a row on the road, and that started last week, losing to Jacksonville, giving up 76, which is not going to be pleasant for the next 3 weeks in that stretch. And so that whole conference is a mess, and they're not the only one. But yeah, so I think the fact that, we've talked about, we kind of stumble into the discussion on scheduling and everybody chasing 5 wins a little bit too. And what that does is it throws conferences for a loop, and you're changing conference schedules. Well, all of a sudden those 4-year contracts that you have with your non-conference opponent where you go home way, well, they don't line up nearly as well as you thought they would 4 years ago or 6 years ago when you started the series with that team down the road that you thought might be a good neighborhood matchup, but also a good competitive matchup too. So I'm sure ADs and coaches are all nodding their head going, yeah, see, it's not that easy to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things. And I think some of what happened in the Central State 8 was they had to adapt to like the old schedules involving teams and their matchups the previous year. So some of that didn't carry over real well with the divisions, and some of them were probably like, well, wait a minute, we played that team on the road last year. Why are we playing them on the road again? So that might have been something that had to do with that as well.
I could do this all day. Stevenson in the midst of 5 games at home out of the next 6 weeks. So that's just like, I've never seen this much of it. So, all right, let's get away from that for a minute and talk about some of the offenses that we've seen. How about Cary Grove this past week? There's something that says, oh my goodness, their starters actually gave up points. They hadn't done that all year. And so they didn't give up a touchdown. Central and the Rockets, they got a field goal on them. That was kind of it in terms of their first teamers. But it was the reaction they had after that to put 400 on the ground and just score, 35 straight points on a decent Jacobs team that kind of turns your head and go, okay, that's the Cary Grove I'm used to.
Yeah, and it was, you looked at it early on in the game. I was kind of following along with it, like as I was out watching another game, but it seemed like Jacobs was off to a good start in that game, and then I went away from it a while. I was looking at other stuff, and then all of a sudden I was like, whoa, what just happened there?
It's 28-7.
It was a tornado of scoring. It was like, it seemed like maybe 5 or 10 minutes had passed, and all of a sudden it was just this violent swing in the other direction. So, I think there were quite a few of those, maybe not quite so many where you felt like the team that was having that done to them is still of pretty good quality. So, I mean, that was one of the, I mean, there were a lot of those flurries of scoring, but it was usually in a matchup where they were two pretty opposite end of the spectrum things. Jacobs is still a playoff team in my mind, and I'd be really surprised if they weren't. So, that's basically what it comes down to is, not only was that impressive, they did it against a pretty good opponent too.
Very intriguing to see if because Jacobs goes to Central here in 2 weeks, and those two teams, all of a sudden Central has figured things out after years. They haven't been in the playoffs in 10 years. Jacobs kind of on always that 6-3, 7-2, 5-4 element. Will there be a spot taken, or will it just be like one of those two teams kind of measuring themselves up for a playoff berth? But first, Central has to get by McHenry, and I want to bring up McHenry just because I saw this nugget and what they did to Dundee Crown to win the game. You saw this, I would imagine, right? Yeah. How many plays did that drive take for the game-winning drive?
I don't remember specifically, but I
have it written down. You want to take a guess?
I don't. 20, 21?
Not that many. 16 is still a lot, though. But Kerry Grove's over here going, hey, wait a minute, we've done this before.
Yeah.
But McHenry to put a 16-play drive together for a winless team to go get their first win of the season, bravo, coaches. Whoever that offensive line coach is, I'm giving you kudos right now for that, because that is fourth quarter mojo, just like you teach it in August.
Yeah, definitely. And it's the Fox Valley is another example of that, where it's like you look at a close conference like that, usually a pecking order kind of establishes itself. I don't know if we've really done that yet, other than at the top where I think we've managed that. But like in that middle group to maybe where the bottom is, are we sure? Like on a week-to-week basis? I don't think we are.
I don't think it's that good. That's the other thing.
That could be. That very well could be. But
the Fox Valley's got a lot of bottom feeders and trying to figure out who's the best of them right now. And I think that's where Central and Jacobs and maybe a Huntley slip back down that way, because the two Crystal Lakes are not very good right now. We're trying to figure out where Hampshire is going to go, and they didn't score anything on Crystal Lake South. So, there's a third and fourth playoff bid that's just kind of up for grabs, and whoever wants it's going to get it. Cary Grove and Prairie Ridge are both sitting there saying, well, you all figure that out because this week we've got an hour and a half game to play with the single wing option. It'll be done before 8:30.
Yeah. So, it'll be done. It'll be done well before we get on air on Friday night, Matt.
Yes, we'll have a full recap ready to go when we come on 9:30 for that. I want to get to the small school stuff too, and I also want to break down the I-8 and see if we can get some Duquesne Conference conversation real quick before we wrap things up. Coal City, 74 points. We love that. 19 plays. That's all they ran to get 74 points. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact stat, but I think it was their leading rusher, Landon Benson, had 4 touchdowns on 7 carries.
That's a good percentage.
Yeah, so I mean that was what he had an early night, obviously, but that was one of those things where I looked at it and I'm like, boy, there probably should have been some impressive yardage totals in that game, and then I was like, no, there really wasn't. And then I looked at the drive chart and I was like, oh. They seem to be getting the ball at around the 35-yard line, scoring in one play. So that's why we weren't amassing too many yardage totals. So
makes sense.
Yeah, but definitely interesting with the Kohlers moving forward, because Piatone dropped out of the ranks of the undefeated. Mantino's still in it. I mean, so it's not like we are having this situation where it's Wilmington and Coal City, and maybe it will still be that way. But at least there's some teams in that second tier that are ready to maybe push the Kohlers a little bit if given the opportunity. So that makes for a little bit more interesting conversation in the Illinois Central 8 than when is Wilmington playing Coal City.
I love that conference, and I will say this for years. You and I have been doing this a long time, and I've covered enough playoff games as both a writer and a broadcaster. There's nothing quite like a Wilmington playoff game. A quarterfinal, semifinal game in that building is just really, really hard to beat. I encourage anyone to get a chance to go. You got to go see it for sure. And I'm talking especially to the 17 and 18-year-olds that are at the big schools. If you can get a couple of your football buddies in the car and go drive down to a 6 o'clock Wilmington start on a Saturday see that smoke and the motorcycles, you're going to be like, oh, so this is what we're missing out on in the playoffs. This is awesome. Very cool.
I can't recommend that experience enough. I've also had several experiences where I was almost taken out on the narrow sidelines. And I was like, hey, that's just the price of doing business here. This is Wilmington. I got to deal with it, and I got to pay more attention.
I covered a game it was Chicago Christian in the second round. It was a Saturday, it was 6:00, and it was a blowout. But that press box so small, 20 degrees out. There's nowhere to go. You're going downstairs to stand on the field like everybody else. And so
exactly.
You shared that experience, but you are right on top of everybody down there. So speaking of small schools, I'm going to switch over to the Big Northern a little bit because I keep starting to see the Byron and Dixon kind of, comets and, looking to meet each other, the meteors heading towards each other. Dixon's a good football team. Do we really know how good they are?
It's interesting because with a closed conference, you can't really figure it out very well. Just while we're on the topic of the Big Northern, I think there's another team there that's kind of flying a little bit under the radar. I think Rockford Lutheran might be pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, just based on what they've been able to do so far, I think they might be pretty good. I don't know if they're quite at the Byron Dixon level yet, but I think they're in the neighborhood. They're waving from the window. I'll give them that. But Byron and Dixon, like, I still think Byron's a pretty substantial favorite when they run into each other. But Dixon continues to put together a pretty good run. They've had a little bit of success in the playoffs. I think this is a group that it's one of those situations, we talked about this before. The success is kind of breeding upon itself at this point.
Yeah.
Where I feel like they are, the previous group is seeing, hey, let's keep this going. Let's keep this going. And it's working for them. So Byron's obviously going to be a massive challenge, but I think Dixon is, at least worthy of stepping on the field, feeling like if things go perfectly for us tonight, catch a breaks, we can be in this football game.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the Shaner family, 9-2 last year, they got to the second round in Class 4A. They're going to find out because they have Rockford Lutheran this week coming down to Dixon for that one. And then, again, Dixon's schedule's fascinating because they picked up Johnston City, as we talked about, that 5.5-hour drive the week before hosting Byron. So you're going to have that playoff intensity, but you're also going to have that playoff fatigue of having that long road trip and then Monday having to go back to work. And that's going to be interesting to see how that whole week goes. That coaching staff's going to have a good feel come Wednesday, Thursday, leading into that Byron game for sure. And again, both Johnston City and Byron 4-0 heading into this week. So let's go to the I-8 real quick because Sycamore, they eked out a win at Rochelle. Not an easy place to go get a win. Canelan keeps rolling. We're trying to figure out if Morris is still in the mix there as well. So what have we learned from that conference in the last week that make you say that it's someone else that's going to be in the mix this year of those three?
I don't know. Like, I really am. I'm like, I don't know if we learned that much last week. I think that with Rochelle losing, the way that they did, where they were never really a huge threat in that game, I thought that was a little interesting. I think we'll find out a little bit more this week with Morris playing Caneland. I think that might show us where those two teams are at right now, because I can't get a great read on Caneland right now. So I'm not really sure, like, are they up there? I mean, they do have a couple of impressive, what looked like impressive non-conference wins. Washington, Wakanda. I mean, those are good, solid,
good ones.
They took DeKalb to task, but I mean, they've beaten who's in front of them. But I'm just not really sure if they're ready to bridge that gap to Morris, because it's been in the past. It's been like, we've seen this situation before. Like, they go into Morris, good record, and then Morris beats them handily. Are they ready to take that and go to the next step? I don't know. So
I mean, I would say in the last 50 years, Canelan's gone to Morris maybe a handful of times and won down there. And I'm talking PJ Fleck years and that might be it. I honestly, I don't know, because Morris has always been competitive in that stretch too. Kanelin's has these ebbs and flows a little bit, although more sustained now. But Carter Grabowski, you can't ask him to do more. He's getting interceptions, getting fumbles. He's running kickoffs back. He's, your star running back. So, in terms of what Coach Thorgerson wants him to do, he can't do everything. So it'll be curious to see how this collective defense goes against this Morris offense, who can score some points, as we saw against that Peoria matchup a couple of weeks ago. So that'll be a good one for sure. Sycamore, again, they have the talent, and it'll be fascinating to see what they continue to do as they keep rolling. Back to Kaneland for a second. Are you ready for Kaneland and Althoff week 9 to just completely mess up your brackets as you see that game go unfold?
Yeah, it's one of the, that's very interesting what's going on there with, the Interstate 8 playing those week 9 non-conference games, and they're kind of all over the map. I mean, there are matchups that you would never conceive would be happening, like LaSalle Peru's playing O'Fallon. I mean, these are games.
Let's go.
I like my track records when I'm looking at these things, and I know every year every team is different, but you can get a feel. Over a decade of time, you're like, hey, this is usually how this goes. I mean, but with games like that, I'm like, I just kind of throw my hands up and be like, well, guess we just got to wait and see what happens.
Cahokia goes to Sycamore. That makes sense. And then you have, my favorite one is Ottawa and St. Bede. And they hadn't played each other, I think, since the 70s. And they're at the whole Illinois Valley's going, oh, this will be fun. So, maybe there's no playoffs at stake for either one of those teams, but, that'll be fun for them. A couple seconds left before we wrap up. Batavia looked really good in that second half against St. Charles North. What do you make of the Bulldogs? Nathan Whitwell is a tank. You can't stop him, and St. Charles North could not do so in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting to watch Batavia do this because you've seen such a varied offense from them, but when they need to, they kind of turtle up and go to their man. And that's what they're doing already early in this year. So, I mean, at this rate, he's going to post massive numbers. I mean, just ridiculous numbers. But it'll be interesting to see as we go further into the season, do they look to diversify a little bit? So, or will they continue to have him shoulder as much of the load that he has to this point? Because so far, nobody's figured out a way to stop it. And I know that most coaches are like, I'm not going to try to ram this square peg into this round hole. So if this is working for us, let's just keep doing it. But it'll be interesting to see, because I think Batavia is at its best when it has a little bit of offensive diversification. But, hey, if this is what works, it's hard to argue with it as well.
Yep, and no real game of the week, so to speak, in the Duquesne this week. I guess you call Batavia at Wheaton North, St. Charles North, Wheaton South. Those are the games. Geneva's got homecoming, so there's buildings down the street here that are painted up and, pulling the kids out for the parade on Friday, so to speak. So that'll be the vibes are good, for the Vikings. But, 60 points they've scored now twice. They've just got one more hurdle before all hell breaks loose around here with a certain matchup, the team of the South next week here against Batavia Bulldogs.
Yeah, it's Geneva. I feel like, they're getting a lot of respect, and understandably so.
I would agree. Yeah.
I still feel like it's weird. I mean, they're like a top 15 team, but I still feel like maybe they're still flying under the radar just a little bit. I feel like they need this Batavia game gives them an opportunity to really plant a flag, and it'll be interesting if they do so. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Who are you interested in watching this week? Where you might step out to?
I have not decided yet what I was going to do. I mean, I'm trying to figure out who's going to make it happen, but like the closest top teams to me right now all don't have very attractive matchups this week. Yeah. So I'm not really sure what I'm going to do yet. I guess I got to do some digging.
You and I are tethered a little bit to this show, so that's sort of why we can't really go anywhere. And
for
me, I mean, I don't really want to go see Geneva Glenbard North. I'm just not really interested in that, because that might be done in about a minute. But St. Francis down the street has Providence, and that might be one where I kind of go, we take a couple minutes of that and get over there and see if I can evaluate the Spartans. especially after they lost to Providence lost to St. Rita, to see if they can kind of turn the corner and are they for real. So
Yeah,
we'll see how this goes.
I might shoot up Interstate 57 and go see Piatone in Coal City. I
You
might
go.
that might be what I hit.
All right. Well, that's our week. That's our show. Thanks for joining us today. For Steve Soucie, I'm Matt Rodewald. Week 5 coming up. This has been the Week 4 recap on Friday Night Drive on Shaw Local.